Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Lehigh Conference of Churches, our Campbell Lecture of 2022, with an outstanding speaker on tonight, Mr. David LaMotte. Welcome, and thank you for coming. So we're going to continue to be hopeful that the tornadoes do not come, and the rain will cease, and we will enjoy the rest of our evening and get home safe. So welcome again, and I am Jeannie Watson. I am from the Lehigh Conference of Churches, the Ecumenical Associate. Hello. Hello. I was up here to welcome you and thank everyone for coming, and we are so glad that we are in person. We've been on Zoom for the past 2 years. So this is our first time after 2 years coming together in person. So it's good to see everyone out of the box. So I'm going to open up with a short prayer, and we're going to move forward, and our Executive Director, Abby Goldfarb, will take us further in our program. God, we thank you for this time. We thank you for your grace and your mercy. We thank you for traveling mercy for all, oh God. We pray that you will continue to bless us and keep us, oh God, and strengthen us in the work that you have called us to. We pray that you will touch the lecturer on tonight, that you will word his mouth and order his steps and the things he will have to give to us on tonight. We pray, Lord God, for bountiful blessings. Lord God, we pray for our nation. We pray for Ukraine, that you are blessed, God, in the mighty name of Jesus. And we thank you for your miracles, your signs, and your wonders. In Jesus' name, amen. Abigail.
That's my Jeannie. I couldn't love her more if I tried. So hi, everyone. Welcome. It is so good to be with you this evening in person, to enjoy some fellowship and some good food. Learn something tonight, hear an extraordinary speaker. So the Campbell Lecture Series has been a conference event for just about 30 years. We are blessed tonight with one of the founders of this lecture series here with us today. So lucky us. Thanks for coming. And the Campbell Lecture Series takes place with the purpose of promoting the enduring importance of Christian unity in today's society. And each year, a lot of care and consideration is given to the speaker that we'll invite. And when the committee sat down this year, there was just no short supply of topics to discuss. There was just problems to unpack, opinions to explore. There was just really no shortage of work to be done. We see this every single day at the Conference of Churches while we walk with our neighbors in need when they come to the conference in hopes that we can help them. Record numbers this year of food insecure families, rental assistance requests, people with no income at all, just really starting at the very beginning. And there just seems to be more barriers than I can count, and yet someday, each day, the next day, there seems to be more barriers than there were the day before. They seem to multiply somehow. 48 staff, each at the bottom of the boat, bucket in hands, tossing water full of societal issues right over the side. And if any of us ever stop and look up, the first thing they say is, isn't there more we could do? So tonight, thankfully, we'll be hearing more on how it is that we could do more, or do the right stuff, or the best stuff, or do it in the best way. Today's environment leaves no short supply of work to be done, but it also leaves endless opportunities. And I'm excited to hear more about this tonight and get some guidance on what's ours to do and how positive change making can be possible. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our guest this evening, esteemed author, speaker, songwriter, new record on the way, right? Mr. David LaMotte.
Thank you, friends. I always take it as a really good sign if people clap before I've actually done anything. I very much appreciate that. Good sign. I'm going to take my hat off and put it on from time to time tonight. I want to warn you about that because the glare can be intense, but bald guys need hats. I had no idea how drafty the world is. Represent. I had no idea how drafty the world is until I shaved my head, and it's a drafty world, so sometimes I get cold. I'll put it back on. That's not at all how I planned to start out tonight. I just thought I'd explain that part. It is really an honor and a privilege to be with y'all. I'm feeling sincerely joyful being in a room with you. And partly it's joy about being in a room with anybody, right? It's been a long, heavy couple of years, and we don't know what comes next, but right now it is good to be in community. And I'm humbled by the invitation. From what I know about y'all, you're doing the work every day. I want to be super clear that as I show up tonight, I have some stories to tell, I have some framework to offer, but the magic in that is where it intersects with your experience. Different lives teach different lessons. And I also want to name that my particular social location limits my view in some ways, right? I am a person who was dealt all the traditional privilege cards, pretty much all of them. And that doesn't make me a bad person, doesn't make me a good person, but it means that I'm not aware of some stuff that's going on right around me unless I try really hard to learn about it. And I'm trying hard to try hard. But there are always going to be blind spots. So I'm grateful for the exchange. And I say all that to say that I'm not attached to being right. I'm going to offer you all some ideas tonight, and I hope they are of value to you, even if their value to you is that I articulate the opposite of what you believe and help you clarify your beliefs. I will be grateful to have served you in that way. So I want to just start off there and say that I'm truly honored to be with y'all who are doing the work tonight and offer a couple of stories and see if there are sparks in them. I want to welcome you, which is kind of weird because I'm the guest here. But I've been asked to hold this space for a little while, so I want to welcome you into it. And I don't know about y'all, but I have walked into some rooms where some people were speaking at the front with microphones, and they said, "Welcome." And I didn't feel welcome. For various reasons, right? So I want you to know what I mean when I say this word that we throw around really lightly. Welcome. If I'm asked to hold the space, I want you to know where the boundaries of the space are. So I want to welcome you tonight if you're feeling weary. Thank you for coming anyway. I want to welcome you tonight if you're feeling energized and excited. Thank you for bringing that joy into the room. We're all walking in here with our own stories tonight, right? But we get to be community now. I want to welcome you if you're really comfortable in this place, if this feels like home to you. I want to welcome you if you're not comfortable in this place, if this doesn't feel like home to you. Welcome. I want to welcome you if you wake up every morning and celebrate your body. I want to welcome you if your best days are kind of an uneasy truce. I want to welcome you no matter the shape of that body, its height. I want to welcome you no matter who you love. I want to welcome you if you have disabilities in places where they're easy for other people to see them. I want to welcome you if your disabilities are in places where they're harder to see. I want to welcome you if you're a Republican, a Democrat, Green Party, Libertarian, none of those. I want to welcome you if the assumptions that people make about your gender tend to be accurate. I want to welcome you if the assumptions people make about your gender tend to be inaccurate. Welcome. I want to welcome you if your faith tonight feels like the rock on which your whole life is built. And I want to welcome you if that foundation feels a little shaky. You're welcome here. I want to welcome you if you have skin the color of walnut, or of ebony, or of pine, or of cedar. I want to welcome you if that skin is smooth, or if it bears the map of your journey, like mine does. I want to welcome you if you're formally ordained or informally ordained. I think that covers us all. I want to welcome you if you're feeling wounded and trying to heal, or if you're feeling strong and trying to figure out where to point your energy. I want to welcome you if you think of yourself as young, or if you no longer think of yourself as young. You get where I'm going with this, right? If you are a child of God, you are welcome in this place. Spoiler, you're a child of God. And you are welcome in this place. So my friend Brian Ammons, who's recently the chaplain at Warren Wilson College, has a much more succinct way of saying all that. He says, all of you are welcome here, and each of you is welcome here, but most importantly, all of each of you is welcome here. That would have saved a lot of time. My sister is a lawyer. She's a public defender in Asheville, North Carolina. She went to law school at age 50. Before that, she had been a professional potter. She had a pottery shop. And she got more and more concerned about the brokenness of our death penalty system, and eventually decided she had to go to law school. So she basically did the pattern backwards, right? Started out as a successful artist and ended up with a day job. And so she went to Cornell Law at age 50, got a degree, and now is a public defender in Asheville, North Carolina. And I figured because she's a lawyer, I get to say stipulate. So there are two things that we're going to stipulate right up front. A couple of ideas I want to stack so that we can build other things on top of them. And I think these are things we can stipulate. I think these are things we can just agree to without having to argue about it. But maybe not. But let me just put them out there, because these are assumptions I'm making that we can agree on these things. The first one is that stories matter. They matter a great deal more than we give them credit for. We tend to say that data matters and stories don't matter. But I believe really firmly that data only takes on significance for us in terms of directing our daily lives when it's placed within a story that we believe, right? So the story that you believe about who you are, who God is, how the world works, those stories direct every little tiny change we make all day long, right? So I'm going to say that we understand the world mostly in terms of stories which sometimes hold data, and that they guide our actions even when we are not aware of them. So stories that we have absorbed from our culture can direct our actions even when we're not aware of them. With me so far on that? Okay. Some of them are so deep within us that they guide our actions even when we know they are false. Right? Stories that we actively reject still inform our actions. A lot of white people have been learning about racism in recent years, right? We've got a little work to do there left. I'm saying that ironically. We've got a lot of work left to do there left. But part of what we're learning is that when I was a child, I thought there were racists who wore cloaks and, were really, really mean. And then there was the rest of us who were nice people, and that's really not how it works. Racism is kind of a system that's baked into the whole pie, and all of us are participating in it. And it's not something that you are or aren't, it's something that you spend your life healing from. Hopefully, right? So, I utterly reject racism. It doesn't mean that I'm without any bias or any racism within me. I'm steeped in that in my culture all the time, right? So, it's something I'm going to spend my whole life healing from. That's just an example. That's not the main story I want to talk about tonight. So all stories matter, and they matter more than we give them credit for often. There's another thing I want to stipulate. Let's see if we can do this one. Christians are called to change the world. Now let me be clear about that. I don't mean that other people aren't also called to change the world. And I don't mean that Christians are called to fix the world. We'll talk more about that. But if we take seriously the words of Jesus and the commandments that we encounter in the New Testament, we can't be people of the status quo. We can't say everything's cool, it's working like this, right? We are called over and over again to engage with the people around us, to feed the hungry, to clothe the naked, to turn over some tables, to interrupt some stone throwing, right? Over and over and over again. So can you all go with me on that? All right, those are our two stipulations. Okay, we've knocked out section 1. Section 2, all communication is a miracle. Here's what's happening right now. Right now, I am presumably having a thought, and I'm encoding that thought into language. And then I'm encoding that language into little electrical patterns and chemical patterns in my brain that are squeezing down through my neck here and making my lungs contract at a very precise calibration to throw just enough air across my vocal folds that are creating little tiny vibrations that are going through the air. Let's leave the sound system out of it. That's a whole separate miracle. Those little vibrations, little pressure patterns, little waves in the air are coming to your ear, and then all that's happening backwards. And those words that I'm using to encode the ideas have different meanings for different people. How does that ever work? Right? It is not surprising that we sometimes misunderstand each other. It's amazing that we ever communicate at all. Right? So given that, I want to take a minute to define just 3 words. Maybe 4. We'll see. I want to start with premillennial dispensationalism. No, I'm kidding. Now I want to start with love. A very common word that we throw around like we all agree about what it means. But that word means a lot of different things, right? I mean, let's do it. What are some meanings of love? Not necessarily the best meanings, just some meanings. Compassion. Connection. Passion, yes. Affection. Well, so far we rhyme. I love that. Care. Empathy. Sacrifice. Those are a lot of different concepts already, right? I have not done this study. I have not sat down and laid this out and done the study so I've got the empirical data. But I'm just going to suggest that if I did do the study, I know what the data would be. If we took a week and we tallied every time we hear the word love and the meaning that it had, I think one meaning of love would be overwhelmingly more common than any other in our common daily conversation day to day. It's not that one. That's my wife and my son. And actually, it's about half of my wife and half of my son. He's 13 now, so that's less than half of him. I love them both very much, and I love them differently. Already the word fails, right? Because it means 2 totally different things there. I also really love Reese's Cups. And that's a really different definition, right? So the Reese's Cup definition is, I like it a whole lot. And I think that's how we mostly use the word love. I love that song. I love Reese's Cups. I love Indian food, right? It's a point on a continuum of affection. But that's not what Jesus was talking about. I somehow got my slides out of order. Let's go back to that one. Jesus did an amazing thing in this verse. In the Great Commandment, there are 3 versions of it in the Gospels. And in this Gospel version, in Matthew version, he did a really weird thing, which is that they asked him a question, and he answered it. Right? He never did that. He'd ask him questions, he'd be like, let me tell you a story. He'd tell you a story, and then he'd walk away and let you figure it out, and scratch your head. What's the mustard seed? What is that? But in this case, he just answered the question. What's the greatest commandment? You all know it, right? Love the Lord God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind. And the second is like it, love your neighbor as yourself. All the law and all the prophets hang on these 2 commandments. All the law and all the prophets hang on these 2 commandments. So why don't Christians hold up this verse at football games? They asked Jesus, what's the main thing? He gave them a clear answer. This is the main thing. Love each other. Love God. This is the main thing. Everything else you have ever learned about God, about Jesus, about how we are to love each other, needs to get filtered through these two things. And if it doesn't pass the filter, it's a detail. How's that not the main thing that we're preaching, friends? How is that not the main thing? He was so clear. So I want to be clear when I'm using the word love that I'm not talking about a point on a continuum of affection. My working definition at the moment of the kind of love I'm talking about is holding up another person's dignity and value as equivalent to your own and treating them accordingly. So sometimes we're called to love each other even when we don't like each other, because like and love are not points on a continuum, they are different things. All right, that's what I mean when I'm talking about love in this context tonight. Another really common word, hope. And for me, I would suggest that we mostly use hope and optimism interchangeably in our cultural conversation. And for me, they're really different things. And I want to be clear about that. Because hope and optimism, hope is an active thing. Optimism is, as Václav Havel said, it's prognostication. It's what you think is going to happen. That's really different from where you point your life. Václav Havel said, my favorite words about hope in the history of the English language, he said, hope is not prognostication, it is an orientation of the spirit. It's not what you think is going to happen, it's where you point your life. So it is entirely possible to be hopeful and not optimistic. Yeah? Okay, so that's what I mean when I'm talking about hope. These three folks were, in one case, are Hopemongers. You probably recognize the ones on either side. Up in the corner, that's Nelson Mandela, and of course, Rosa Parks. And the guy in the middle is a guy named Omar Barghouti, who's a Palestinian activist. I met him in Ramallah in 2008. And there was a small group of us chatting with Omar. And we had about a 2-hour meeting with him. We asked him lots of questions, and he told us lots of stories. And they were all pretty depressing. And at the end of that time, we were asking some questions, and somebody asked, Omar, how do you get up in the morning? Like, how do you keep moving on this work? And when Omar answered, I realized that he and I are about the same age. He said, you know, when I was in college, we were all working opposing the anti-apartheid regime. And folks told me I was completely crazy to spend any time on that because the apartheid regime had the support of the world's powers. It had all the money and all the guns and all the power. And all the opposition had was that they were right. And everybody said we were wasting our time. And look what happened. Not to overstate the case, not to say that everything's cool in South Africa now, it's not. But goodness gracious, it's come a really long way, right? And if I had walked into a campus meeting in the late 80s, say, of folks who were working opposing the apartheid regime, and I said, hey, I'm new and I'd like to help out. And they said, okay, well, tell me what you know about the situation. And I said, well, you know, I know that apartheid government is overtly racist and it's all codified into 3 different classifications. And I could tell them some details about how that system works, maybe, a little bit of that. And they'd say, okay, great. And then I'd say, and here's what I think is going to happen. In a couple of years, Nelson Mandela is going to get out of prison, and then a couple of years after that, he's going to be elected president of South Africa. And then South Africa is going to pass the most progressive constitution in the history of the world in terms of civil rights. That's what's going to happen in the next few years.
And what would they have said to me? Good. You get back on your unicorn and ride on out of here, because we've got serious work to do here in the real world, and you are delusional, right? But history surprises us in all kinds of ways. It's not always bad news, right? Spirit is still moving in the world. Omar Barghouti didn't say all that, but he said, no one can tell me that a just peace with Israel and Palestine isn't possible, because I've seen impossible things happen when we work for it. That's hope. So these three, with the odds stacked against them, how did they know they were going to win? It's a trick question. You can say it. They didn't, right? They didn't know they were going to win. That's the point. They were hopeful. It didn't have anything to do with what they thought was going to happen. It had to do with where they were going to point their lives. So y'all have heard, I'm sure, I'm pretty confident that probably 95% of the people in this room have heard a story that is often told when people talk about aid and justice work. It's a fable about babies in a river. You all know that one? Some do, not as many as I thought. Okay, so here's what happens. A woman is walking by a stream one day, and she hears some splashing around. She thinks maybe a duck has landed in the stream, and so she looks over at the stream, and it's not a duck, it's a baby flowing down the river. And she runs into the river and gets the baby and is trying to figure out what in the world's going on. The baby's coughing and spluttering. She takes it over to the shore, and she's trying to figure out what to do when she hears more splashing, and she turns around, there's another baby coming down the river. So she runs back out, gets the other baby. She's got these two babies. About that time, somebody else comes walking along the path, and she says, help me out here, there's babies in the river. And sure enough, here comes a third one. And so they start gathering the babies, and they're putting them on the shore, and they start calling their friends and saying, bring blankets, bring formula, bring diapers, I don't know, bring stuff. We got babies in the river. And the babies keep coming, and so they start gathering people to take care of the babies. And then somebody brings a tent to get the babies out of the sun, and over the next few months, they build a building, and they get a 501c3, and they start raising money to take care of these babies, right? And they're doing good work caring for these babies. And then a year into this, an elder walks in, smacks her cane on the floor. Everybody looks up. She says, don't you think it's time we went upriver to see who's throwing them in? Okay, hang with me just a moment. That's a story that folks who are involved in justice work often tell. And they tell it sometimes with an edge that feels denigrating to aid work to me. Let me be abundantly clear that that's not what I'm saying. If you take everybody upriver to go figure out who's throwing them in, the babies who are in the river drown. Right? So there's this little air of superiority there that can come across in that story. That is not what I'm saying. We need to do both kinds of work. And which kind of work is yours to do is not for me to determine or anybody else, right? Your calling is for you to determine. But both things are important and they're different. I often go speak with churches and do workshops and such, and folks say, oh, well, we're a real justice church. I'm like, cool, tell me about that. And when they tell me about it, they tell me about aid work. And that's awesome. Aid work is so important. People need to be cared for in this moment, not 10 years from now when we get the laws changed, right? It's very important, but it's a different thing. And I think it's important to draw the line of distinction. So aid work is determining and addressing people's needs, hopefully because they're determining their needs, right? And justice work is about challenging the systems that make people needy. They're both really important and they're different. Okay, that's our whole vocabulary thing. Oh, it's not. There's one more vocabulary word. This one right here. Tell me what you think of when you think of that word in terms of images, specifically Pictures, not ideas, but what pictures come to your head, come to your mind when you hear the word activist? First. Demonstration. Picketers. Lobbying. What else? Fundraising. Okay, and lobbying, fundraising, like, draw me a picture. What does it look like to fundraise?
Everything from potlucks to mailing.
Okay, great. So, sending out letters, having a potluck. Yes, somebody said something over here?
Protest signs.
Protest signs, right, right. In the traditional conception, cultural conception of activist, what affect goes with this? What emotion? Anger, right. So it doesn't take me long, anytime I ever ask any group of people, to get to angry people marching in the streets with signs. Right? That's kind of the cultural conception of what it means to be an activist. I want to be super clear that that's not what I mean. That's a form of activism, sometimes a necessary, useful form. But an activist, in my vocabulary, again, in the hopes that we can understand each other, and in all these cases, I'm not arguing for right definitions, I'm just hoping we can understand each other, so I want you to know what I mean when I use these words. An activist is somebody who believes in taking any action in the face of a problem rather than being passive and doing nothing. If you see a problem and you take action, you are an activist. If I could, I would like to spell the word like that, with a hyphen. Makes it clearer, right? An activist, one who believes in being active. But activism and protest are not synonymous. Protest is one half of activism. The other half is, rather than opposing what's wrong, building what's right. One of my favorite projects I've been involved in for the last decade or so, I have a band. There are 3 of us in the band. It's a trio. It's called Abraham Jam. It's got a Christian, a Jew, and a Muslim in a band together. And we like to say that harmony can be even more powerful than unity. And I'm saying that as a Quaker. We like unity. So sometimes you try to embody what's right as opposed to just opposing what's wrong. All right, briefly, narratives are stories. Meta-narratives are big stories that hold the little stories. So Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire is a narrative. Meta-narrative is the good guys tend to win. Okay? That's what I'm talking about. So there was a time when troubadours would come from town to town and tell stories and share news and sing songs, and that was how we held our cultural stories. One of the ways. Where do we hold our stories now? How do we decide what we believe in as a culture? Somebody said something? Social media, definitely. Where else? Movies? Yeah. Yeah. I think both of those things are absolutely true. I'm going to focus on movies a little bit. I love this Far Side. So here's a question, and now we're getting to it, the main thing I want to talk with you about. Here's a question that we have a cultural answer for. And it's a narrative that I think is one of those narratives that's so deep in us that even if we completely reject it intellectually, it still informs our actions. And it messes with us. This is a narrative that is ubiquitous and, I believe, wrong. That's a bad combination. So the question that we're trying to answer is, how do you fix a really big problem, like a cultural level problem? How do you deal with a large-scale thing? How does change really happen? We have an answer for that as a culture, and you can find it if we were to drive to the nearest multiplex with say 12, 15 movies on the marquee and counted how many of them had this narrative. It would be, well, most of them, right? narrative says that if you got a really big problem, what you need is somebody really special to do something dramatic in a moment of crisis, and that's how you fix the problem. Tell me that this is not the plot of most of our entertainment. Somebody special, not like you, in a moment of crisis, when you have to act right then, where everything's going to be lost, does something really dramatic, and that's how you fix the problem.
It's usually violent.
It's usually violent, right? We get into Walter Wink and the myth of redemptive violence, and that's another whole conversation. Yes. But let's just go this far for this conversation and say dramatic action by somebody who's inherently special in a moment of crisis. Here are the keys. Somebody special, extraordinary, moment of crisis, dramatic action, and that's how you get change. Also, the word responds is important, right? Because something happens and they respond to it. They don't say, how can we make things better? Let's go get to work. Something happens and you respond to it. Here's some heroes that are actually superheroes. And by the way, there are things that I love about each of these movies. I'm not picking on them. I'm not saying they're bad. But they hold these narratives, and I think these narratives seep in, and they're a little bit toxic, this particular narrative. There is another option. There's another narrative out there. It's a lot less popular, but it has the added benefit of actually being true. And this narrative is the movement narrative. The movement narrative says the large-scale change happens when many people make small intentional efforts in the same direction. That's not to say that some people don't make also large efforts in that same direction, but it's not a movement without lots of people doing a little bit. That's what defines the movement. Yeah? Who cares? This is the next obvious question, right? Does this matter, or is it just like an intellectual exercise? I'm going to suggest, unsurprisingly, that it matters. That it matters to y'all who are showing up and doing the real work every day. Because our instructions are really different depending on which of these narratives we subscribe to. And it's important that we be aware of it. So if you subscribe to the hero narrative, chronologically, what happens in the hero narrative? What's the first thing that happens that we need in the hero narrative? The crisis, right. So something happens, right? You didn't make it happen, it just happened. Something happens, the crisis. So step one is crisis. And how do you get the crisis? A conflict is a crisis, right? Generally, it just happens, right? You don't do anything. So your job in the hero narrative, if you want to fix the problem, step one is wait for the crisis, right? Isn't that, I mean, logically, isn't that what's happening? Okay, so you got the crisis, then what do you need? We need a hero, exactly. We need a hero, right. Okay, and where are we going to get one? Because I don't know about y'all, I do not wake up most mornings feeling particularly heroic. I wake up feeling kind of tired and maybe needing to brush my teeth, right?
The superheroes are on call.
Right. Right, the bat signal. Yeah, in the church you hire them. Oh, yes, we're going to get to that. Right, yeah, we're going to get to that. Right, right, and you ordain them, and then you outsource the fixing of problems. That's exactly right. Mm-hmm. I hear you. Preach, preach.
Go to Hollywood.
All right, so we need a hero, and where do we get one? What happens in the movies? They just show up. So your job is to wait. You're not the hero. Your job is to wait, right? We're constantly reminded that we're not the hero, except when we're told that we should be the hero, which mostly happens with children. Posters on my son's primary school wall said, "The world needs heroes, be a hero." Right? But then at some point we stop feeling like that's us. So we've waited, the crisis happened, the hero shows up, and then step 3 is dramatic action, and it's, it never happens, right? This is not how it works to fix the problem. In fact, friends, I'm going to suggest boldly that this has never happened in the history of the world when you're talking about a large-scale problem. Not once. That a hero has fixed a large-scale problem in the absence of a movement. It happens all the time in our entertainment, and more disturbingly, it happens in our telling of history, though it has never, ever happened in history. I have not yet found an example. Okay, so if you subscribe to the movement narrative, which is a lot less popular, but has the added benefit of being true, then your instructions are, let's just run through them really quickly. We're going to come back and do them more slowly. But real quickly, roughly, your instructions are, consider what's pulling on your heart, find your community, other people who are doing that work already, right? You don't have to go start your own new nonprofit. Somebody's probably got it going. Or you gather your community if they don't, right? And you do start your own new nonprofit. Find your community, figure out what you have together, do an asset inventory. What do you all have to work with? Which is an amazing experience to have in community, right? It's amazing what's in the room that you didn't know was in the room, generally, when you sit down and intentionally do an asset inventory. Make a plan to do something achievable and short-term, and then get to work. And those are very different instructions, right? There are very different instructions. Now, I told you all the things you don't do in the hero narrative. There is one role for you in the hero narrative. What do you do after the hero saves the day? You clap, exactly, right. You celebrate the hero and clap, and you're awesome. I could never do what you do. Activist friends, people say that to you. Thank you for doing what you do. I could never do what you do. You hear that? Because you can always say, here's a good answer when people say that to you. There's a meeting Tuesday night. That's what I do. You can come. You're invited, right? That's how a movement works. I want to tell you a true hero story because I want to clarify a couple of things. I want to make sure you know what I'm not saying. I don't know if any of y'all recognize this man. He was all over the news in 2007, January 2007. He was on his way home from work in New York City, and he was on the subway platform, and a young man just down from him on the subway platform had a grand mal epileptic seizure and fell into the tracks. This man's name is Wesley Autry. And Wesley Autry was traveling with his 2 young daughters, taking them home from school, and he was going home from work. Cameron Halapeter, the film student, he was 22 years old, fell into the tracks. Wesley Autry jumped down to save him and try to get him out, along with a couple of other bystanders. They were trying to get him out, but he's a full-grown man. He was over 6 feet tall, and they couldn't lift him up. You all have seen those platforms, right? It's maybe 4 feet or so. And it's a lot to lift a human body that high. They're trying to do that, and then suddenly they look up and there's a train coming. The other bystander reasonably gets out of the tracks. Wesley Autry looks at Cameron Halapeter, looks at the train coming, looks at the space between the train and the gravel, lies down on top of Cameron Halapeter, pulls his arms and legs in as the train goes racing over them. The engineer sees them there, but can't stop the train. It's going fast. So 5 cars go over them with sparks flying, and his daughter's on the platform, right? They stop the train, and you hear Wesley Autry call out from beneath the train, "We're all right." And they were all right, and they got him out. Let me ask you a stupid question. I'm telling you right up front, this is a stupid question. Was that a heroic thing to do? Yes, that was a heroic thing to do. It's beautiful. I am not saying that people don't do heroic things. Bless him. He did such a courageous thing. And I'm not diminishing that heroism, but as we try to extend this to large-scale social problems, I think it doesn't work. So the question is this a good model for change? If this is our model, how do we deal with, say, climate change? Hang out on icebergs and catch polar bears? Like, how do you do this, right? And this is a narrative we give our kids, sometimes consciously, sometimes unconsciously, to say, look, there's going to come a moment. You encounter this in children's literature a lot. The wise old person says to the child, there's going to come a day when all of your courage and wisdom and strength will be called upon, and on that day, rise up. But the subtext of that is, until that day, wait. Just hang out. Because the dramatic stuff is what matters. So just wait, it's going to happen, it'll be cool. And that's problematic, I think. And again, I think it's a story that we soak up without considering. And even if we completely reject it intellectually, it still informs our daily actions. And I don't know about y'all, but it makes me feel powerless a lot of the time when I am not powerless. I also want to raise the question of how we're defining hero. You know me by now that I'm a word nerd and I like to think about how we define things. But if we define hero as a person who did something heroic, which would seem the most logical definition of hero, if we actually defined it that way, then when the press showed up, as they did with Wesley Autry, and said, how's it feel to be a hero? What's the script? Everybody says the same thing. The press shows up and says, how's it feel to be a hero? And the hero says, I'm not a hero, in the same exact moment that it's abundantly clear that you're a hero, right? Certainly there's a certain level of humility called for here, but yeah, I think we define hero as different from us. There's a different category of people who are heroes, and then there's normal people. So what would you have done? Let's be clear. We don't know what we would have done, right? There are many of us who think, I couldn't have done that, who maybe in the moment, the adrenaline would kick, and you would do exactly that. And there may be some of us who would think, yeah, I think that's probably what I would have done. Maybe in the moment, not so much, right? We don't really know what we would do in a moment like that. But what do you think? Like, how does it make you feel? I've asked a lot of people this question, and overwhelmingly people are like, nuh-uh. I don't think I could have done that. So we tell hero stories to inspire people, but I think unintentionally, often just draw a line between heroes and the rest of us. And it can be demotivating rather than motivating. And it's an important thing to think about, I think, for those of you who are storytellers, which certainly counts at least all the preachers in the room. Here's where it gets more problematic. It's how we tell history, though it's not how history happened. For most of us, Rosa Parks' life was one day long, right? December 1st, 1955. That's the day everybody knows about, except that we don't, because the story isn't really told. The real story. The story that we tell isn't what happened. And the differences are, oh my goodness gracious, it's 5 minutes till 8. I'm having so much fun, and there's a lot more. So I'm going to get through this Rosa Parks thing, and I'm going to wrap it up. But let's do, if y'all would maybe, I want to honor your time. Could I take another 5 or 10 past the hour? If you need to go, I totally honor that you need to go. So Rosa Parks. When I was in elementary school, I heard a story about Rosa Parks. I was born in 1968. Her famous arrest happened December 1st, 1955. It had been just long enough that it was kind of safe to tell a tame version of the story in schools, right? So I learned about Rosa Parks. Rosa Parks was a little old black lady who was tired on her way home from work and decided in the spur of the moment not to give up her seat so that a white man could sit down in it. She got arrested, and that gave flame to the civil rights movement. Is that roughly the story as you originally heard it? Okay. I've told you at least 5 lies right there. Let's just start at the beginning. I said little old black lady. Little. She was 5'2", which in 1955 was precisely the average height of an African American woman in the United States. Incidentally, the average height of a white woman in 1955 was 5'4", largely due to nutritional disparities. That has evened out in the years since. It's an interesting little tidbit of history. So little, she was precisely average, or you might say little. 5'2", it's a subjective call. Old. Day she got arrested, she was 42. Can I get a shout out that that's not old? Please, thank you. I'm looking at that one in the rearview mirror by a good bit. And so, yeah, little old, black. So of course we know that black is a social construct, right? There aren't clear edges on races. They don't exist scientifically. There is incredible variety among human beings that we tend to categorize. That's not to say it doesn't exist, right? Race absolutely exists as a social construct and has massive impact for a lot of people's lives, right? So it can both be not scientifically a thing, but very much true because we've decided it's true, right? So Rosa Parks had 2 white great-grandfathers and had a good bit of Native American blood. She had long, wavy, straight hair, naturally, and she wore it, she never left the house without it wound into a tight bun on the top of her head, like you see in that picture, just like my own grandmother, whose name was Rosa. So I have a really tender connection with Rosa Parks that's not at all logical. So, yeah, 42, little black, tired on her way home from work. Was she tired that day? Whatever you answer to the was she tired question is the right answer. Because what she said about being tired in her own book was, I wasn't tired or no more tired than I usually am at the end of a working day. I was tired of giving in, right? So it speaks to her motivation. That's the pull quote on the back of my edition of her autobiography, My Story. Out of the entire book, that's the line they chose. Because people always told her she was tired, and she always said, you're missing the point, in every interview I ever saw with her, right? That's not the point. That's not the kind of tired that I was. Right, and nobody told me in elementary school that Rosa Parks, by the time she was arrested that day, had been an activist for 20 years, right? That she had been the secretary for the NAACP in Montgomery for 12 years, that 3 months before she was arrested, she went to the Highlander Center in Tennessee and trained in voter registration and nonviolent activism. And then 3 months later, what a coincidence, got arrested on that bus. Couple more historical details. The central fact of the story is wrong, the way we tell it. Rosa Parks was not arrested for not giving up her seat so that a white man could sit down in it. The thing is, let me show you this. So the way the buses worked in 55, there was the 2 doors on the side, one in the front, one halfway back. If you were a person of color, you paid at the front, your dime, everybody paid a dime, and then you got back off the bus and went back and came back in the back. You see in this photo right there, see the little sign that says white? And you see the little divots on the backs of the seats? That sign got moved back as more white folks got on the bus. So when you move the sign back in a full bus, who has to stand up? People of color. How many? Keep thinking about it. You don't have one person stand so that one person can sit down. If the bus is full and you move the sign back, 4 people go and stand so that one person can sit with 3 empty seats beside them. You're not going to sit on the same row. So Rosa Parks was sitting on the left side of the bus with the aisle right here on the aisle, and when she was threatened with arrest, she politely moved over to the window and said he could sit over there. She was arrested not for not giving up her seat so that someone could sit down in it. She was arrested for not giving up her seat so that it could sit empty with 2 other empty seats and an aisle between her and that man. As bad as the story is as you learned it, it's worse. Right? But here's the part I want to tell you before I wrap up really quickly. Joanne Robinson is the person you haven't heard about. Oh, I'm out of time. Some of these things. It's not me, is it? Okay, good. That's the worst when it's my phone. So Joanne Robinson ran an organization called the Women's Political Council. I would love to tell you stories about Joanne Robinson, how she found her way into activist work, but we'll do that another time. Joanne Robinson, the night that Rosa Parks was arrested, the moment she was arrested, somebody took a picture of it on their phone and put it on Facebook, and everybody knew. Some people got off the bus because the police were coming, there was trouble, people just wanted to get out of the way, or just find another way home because they had to get home, make dinner, whatever. So some people got off the bus. It's 5 till 6 when Rosa Parks is arrested. It's about 5 o'clock when things start coming down. Somebody walks into a house and asks to use a phone and calls somebody, and they activate a phone tree. The Women's Political Council is a group of between 200 and 300 women of color in Montgomery who were agitating for change for years previous to the Montgomery bus boycott. They had the boycott organized a year before Rosa Parks was arrested. The night she's arrested, the word gets to Joanne Robinson. Joanne Robinson calls 2 of her English students. She's a professor at Alabama State, which is then a black school. She calls these 2 English students and calls the guy with the keys to the copy room and says to everybody, meet me at the school at midnight. And they all show up at midnight, and they start making copies of a 3-up flyer and cutting it into strips, calling for a 1-day boycott on Monday. From midnight to 4, they make copies and they cut them. From 4 a.m. to 7 a.m., they drive them around town to the neighborhood captains of the Women's Political Council, who then distribute them to their own neighborhoods. So by midday the next day, the entire black part of Montgomery has this flyer on their door. Because these people made some copies. And they had it all laid out. You want to change the world, friends? Make some copies. This is how the world changes. I keep using that phrase, change the world, like that's a reasonable thing to say. You run into somebody at the grocery store tomorrow and they say, what'd you do last night? You say, oh, I heard this guy ramble on about changing the world. How are they going to respond? Maybe a chuckle, maybe an eye roll, right? It sounds naive. But here's the thing, changing the world is not the same thing as fixing the world or saving the world. If you think you can fix the world, that is naive. If you think you can save the world, I humbly submit that that gig might be taken. But if you think you can change the world, you are just paying attention. Friends, you can't be in the world and not change it. Everything you do changes the world, whether you like it or not. So the question for us is, which changes are we going to make? And how do we get started? Thank you for being people who are changing the world every day. I'm honored to be in the room with you and grateful for your time and attention. Bless you.
Again, thank you so much. It was such a pleasure. And as we said, maybe we certainly have time for questions, and even more time afterwards, maybe to have some more conversations, some coffee, tea, and if you want to pick up very small quantity of books that you have left, or some CDs and things like that. So we'll take a few moments for questions.
Great. And I have no corner on wisdom in the room. If you have a statement rather than a question, that's fine too, whatever.
You mentioned love and justice. How do those fit together in your conceptualization?
Well, you make me want to ask you how they fit together for you, because I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. So I'm going to answer slightly obliquely, because the tension that I hear people name in society a lot is between peace and justice. And I think peace and love are pretty, we don't have to slide too much to slide from one to the other. Again, it comes down to definitions for me. So if we have thin definitions of words like peace and justice, then they are completely in conflict with one another. If we have thick, deep, rich definitions of the two, then they are not only compatible, they are essential to each other. Which is to say, if justice means retribution, punishing all the bad guys, and peace means placidity, no conflict, then those two things are very much in contrast to one another. But if justice means wholeness and right relationship with each other and how we can build societies that support everybody, and justice means restoration of broken relationships. I'm a big fan of restorative justice. Then these two things are fundamental to each other. You can't have justice without peace, and you can't have peace without justice. So the words are slippery, but I think that's my answer. Those things are fundamentally intertwined. Yeah, let me come right up here.
I think that I'm very competitive, and one of the things that caught me was in the beginning, because you always say that person won, they won. And so you're talking about restorative, like even think about, two different groups not agreeing on something, and I tried to get away from the I won.
Yeah.
Can you talk to that?
Yeah, I'll mostly say thank you for calling me in. That's a good observation. I appreciate that. Because that's not how I want to think about it. I do want to, the way that I would justify that language, if I were to try to justify it, would be to say that everybody won, because justice won and love won. But I don't want to say, but you're right to catch that, because I think that's not the best language. It doesn't sound that way when I say it. So I appreciate you saying that. My friend Daniel Buttry is a Baptist peace guy who's been working in direct conflict resolution kind of work for lots of years all over the world. And he says we have the wrong metaphor as a nation in terms of how we do politics, that we think of politics as football, where you win by making the other team lose. And we ought to think about it as family. And if you've ever been married, you know that or in a relationship of any kind, you know that you don't win by making your partner lose. It's not a win. It's really not. I can speak from experience. So, yes.
I really like what you told about Rosa Parks. I went on a Rhodes Scholar Civil Rights tour 3 weeks ago.
Wow.
And of course I learned in school about Rosa Parks, Martin Luther King, and I was stunned, literally, by what I learned. I was also reading John Lewis's memoir of the movement at the same time on the trip. And it was such an education, because I became aware of exactly what you were talking about, that it wasn't a few feet walking across the Pettus Bridge. It wasn't a day Montgomery boycott. It was years and years of thousands and thousands and thousands of voter registration drives and foot soldiers and everything. I had no idea. And I think your point is so well taken about the background of how movement occurs, because we only see the little teeny tip of the iceberg. We don't see what's underneath the ocean that went into it.
Thank you for naming that, and thank you for telling that story. And let me say, please keep telling that story, because we all need to hear it. You know, and I say that both to affirm the work y'all are doing every day, and remind you that it matters, because it does. And sometimes it doesn't feel that way when you're in the work every day. So you are changing the world. I want to say that. And yes, I think there's a reason we love the hero narrative. Not only does it provide a really simple story arc and a nice tension point, it's an easy story to tell. But I think the deeper reason we love the hero narrative, it gets us off the hook. Here's the syllogism. If heroes fix things, and I'm not the hero, it's not my job to fix things. But the hero narrative is a lie. The movement narrative is true. Yes.
When you were talking about the hero narrative and showing that story, I was thinking about one of the things that often happens is that you have somebody do something heroic, and then everybody starts trying to dig up dirt about that.
Yeah, right.
Can you talk about how that fits into the whole thing?
Yes, thank you. I love that one.
Absolutely right. So I call that the hero game, where we build a hero up and then we tear them down. And what's funny is that we switch our logic halfway so that we get ourselves off the hook on both sides. So in the first half of the story, this person can do no wrong. They're a saint. They're incredible. And they're not at all like me. What am I, Gandhi? Come on. I can't do what they're doing, right? And so we get ourselves off the hook that way. And then we find out that they're human. And if we were maintaining our logic, we would say, oh, wow, they're human like me. But they did all that stuff. Like, maybe I could do stuff too, even though I'm not perfect. But that's not what we do. We switch it up and say, charlatans! You know, they were lying the whole time. They're not really good people. As though there are good and bad people in the world, and that they're neatly categorized. We're all a bit of each, right? So, yeah, yes, I affirm what you're noting there. That's a game we play, yeah.
One of the things that, and it's a little bit of what I was thinking, that I don't think any of the people that you mentioned in the civil rights, not Rosa Parks, not Martin Luther King, and none of them were doing it for themselves, they were doing it for deeper faith conviction. And I think that left them free, and it wasn't about them, it was about something bigger than them, and that's so amazing.
Yeah, thank you for naming that. Absolutely. Did y'all hear that across the room? She was saying that it's essential to these stories that I was telling here, the folks that I was lifting up to examine their stories, that all of them were acting from deep faith conviction, and that's what kept them going. I believe that's also true of Omar Barghouti, who's Muslim, but all of these folks were driven by deep faith.
Yeah, the story of Rosa Parks and then Joanne Robinson and the organization is wonderful. I'm wondering if you were to tell this story to high schoolers, what contemporary examples might you offer them of movements versus the hero for high schoolers to understand their role?
Man, you just set me up so beautifully. So, yeah, I love to tell stories of contemporary movement work that's going on. I think the Poor People's Campaign is doing really important work. I went to jail with Reverend Barber, just 7 of us, in a pre-trial run for the Moral Monday movement. Before the Moral Monday movement, there were 2 arrests, and I got to be in part of one of those. And that's a longer story. I'll tell it to you another time. But my mugshot is really scary looking. It's intense. Really, it's strange, because I'm never intimidating. So that's not what I wanted to say. You were asking about contemporary things. Here's the story I love to tell to high school students. Spoiler, I wrote a book about it, so that's why I said the thing about setup. In 2007, in Knoxville, Tennessee, there was a Klan rally. And I'll close with this. I know I'm keeping y'all here longer than you planned. There was a Klan rally in 2007. They were holding up signs with despicable things on them, and these neo-Nazi and Klan folk came in Mostly came down from Ohio. They weren't locals in Knoxville. Some local environmental activists decided that they were not happy, getting back to Walter Wink, they were not happy with either fight or flight. They didn't want to go just shout down the shouters and hate the haters. And they also didn't want to just stay home, because then that message is unchallenged, and neither of those really works. So Walter Wink, the nonviolence theorist and pastor, liked to talk about third way options. And it's neither fight nor flight, but a third way. So what they did was they organized and they trained and they prepared some street theater, and they prepared a lot of props. And then they went to the rally. And when the Klan started chanting white power, the clowns, because they went in full clown regalia, started chanting white flour and joining into the rally facetiously. And they had brought bags of flour, and they started having flour fights in the street, and everybody's laughing, which completely undercuts what the Klan is trying to do, right? That's the last thing they want, is everybody laughing. So they're having a big time over on this side of the street. Everybody's watching them and kind of ignoring the Klan. And the Klan starts chanting white power again. And they said, oh, wait, maybe we heard them wrong. Maybe this isn't a rally for white flour. Maybe it's for white flowers. And so they start handing out flowers to everybody in the crowd. They brought all these white flowers. They're giving everybody white flowers. After a minute, they kind of work that gag, and then they say, no, that wasn't it at all. It was tight showers, and they hold up a camp shower, and they're all crowding beneath it and being silly like that. And then there's another one that's not in the book. They said, oh, no, this is a rally for white power, and they started throwing toilet paper. And then the last one was the coup de grace. They said, oh, I've got it now. And when I wrote it into a poem in the book, it said, well, I'll just do the very last part and keep it short. They said, no, I've got it now. This is a rally for wife power. And they pulled on wedding dresses and hoisted up the people in the wedding dresses on their shoulders and said, here's to wives and mothers. So the poem that I wrote about that I made into a thing that looks like a children's book, but it's really third grade and up. It's mostly for adults. The poem ends with these words. And what would be the lesson of that shiny southern day? Can we understand the message that the clowns sought to convey? It seems that when you're fighting hatred, hatred's not the thing to use. So here's to those who march on in their big red floppy shoes. So that's a story I like to tell them, because it's both funny and fairly contemporary, and it didn't happen in black and white in their memory, which is...
Wow, power.
Yeah. Right on. Thank y'all, friends. I would love to say that I would say I hate to keep you here, but I don't. I'd love to keep you here. So I'll let you go out of respect, and if you want to hang around and talk, I'll be here without a microphone, and we can chat. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you. And forgive my voice, I'm getting over a cold. I'm Janelle Rice, president of the board at the Lehigh Conference of Churches. It's my privilege to be here and to certainly enjoy David. And it's really my honor to say that we don't have to say goodbye to you right now. Like you said, we can go outside into the lobby and enjoy some refreshments and get a chance to talk with you more. Tomorrow, though, on your brochure, you might have noted that at 10 o'clock over at the Lehigh Conference of Churches in downtown Allentown at 5th and Allen, we'll be gathering for a community conversation. And so this is really to perhaps take what you've learned tonight or just have a further conversation about something else. It'll be a small group of us, but if you haven't signed up yet for that, you're welcome to just come on over at 10 o'clock. Be aware of parking, particularly the streets that are marked street cleaning. If there is no one parked on the side of the street, as I did last week, note that. You're not being lucky. It's probably because of street cleaning. So join us for that 10 o'clock tomorrow morning. And then at 7:30, David will be showcasing the other side, and I think where you began as a career as a singer and songwriter. And that'll be over at First Presbyterian in Allentown. So really looking forward to getting to hear that side of you and get to listen to you more. So 2 more great events coming up tomorrow. I'd like to really thank DeSales University. They're incredibly generous to give us this space. We're so glad to be here. We're so glad for First Presbyterian of Allentown tomorrow. And hopefully I'll sound less like a frog tomorrow as well. And I'd like to close with just repeating these words again that you shared with us. You are changing the world whether you like it or not. So which changes will you make? So let's ponder that, friends, as we go out. David will be here. Oh, and there's the book table that way. You can pick up something and he can sign something and talk more and have a wonderful evening. Blessings.